everyone, welcome to Plaster Casting and Latex Casting 101. I'm going to walk you through the entire process. First off, you're going to have a sculpt that you want to turn into a latex prosthetic. So this mold wall is going to run up right down the center here. I'm using this clay scraper tool, cutting directly into the sculpt and placing playing cards to create a mold wall that's nice and even. I'll tape up the cards and we'll have 2-inch to 3-inch mold wall all the way throughout. Your next step is to create mold keys. For plaster, what you want it to be are rectangular squares like the one I'm placing here. The very first layer of plaster you're going to put on your sculpt is called the print coat. Your goal here is to get it to be almost of a pancake batter consistency. Take out your paintbrush. For this, you're going to have to go very, very slowly across the sculpt, making sure the plaster sticks at various points. Parts of your sculpt are going to be vertical, so it's going to be hard to get it to adhere. Just keep at it, it takes a while. Wait about 30 minutes and get ready for your second coat of plaster. This will be more of a cake batter consistency. You'll also want to have some burlap strips cut off and ready as reinforcement. Make sure you get all the grooves and undercuts. Start layering on burlap. You're going to want to do 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 more coats of burlap and plaster. What you want to make sure here is that your mold wall is nice and thick on all sides. Make sure you do several layers of burlap. I would say minimum 2 to 3 layers, probably closer to 4 to 5. So you're going to want to set your mold on the side. I like having a pillow wrapped with saran wrap and just set your mold gently on there. You don't want it to be damaged at all. When the time comes, flip the mold over, peel off those note cards, peel out the clay that you were using for your mold keys. Take a can of air and or a paintbrush and just gently brush out the edges of the mold. If you have holes or air pockets in your mold wall at this time, what you can do is go very, very carefully in and add in some plaster to fill up those gaps. I would not recommend this unless it's a very, very clean edge. I have one air pocket at the very front where the mold wall slightly collapsed before I set it on its side. So I'm going to fill that up, let that dry, and then come back to it in about an hour. Next up, pry keys. You're going to want to add 3, 4, 5, depending on how large your mold is. I put in 4 pry keys. They're spaced out apart from the mold keys. They look exactly like your mold keys did in the first round, but they're going to exist in clay form at the final piece. What this eventually will allow you to do is go in with your screwdriver, pry in there, and serve as a way to get your mold open really, really quickly. One thing that I've also found works marvelously is adding a very thin strip of clay around every part of your mold wall so you can easily tell what is mold part A and what is mold part B. Use a ton of Vaseline, a ton. Slather your mold wall with Vaseline. More Vaseline than you think you need. Make sure you go into the very edge of your sculpt and make sure there's no Vaseline on the clay itself, but that right up to the very, very end, you have covered it with Vaseline. And now you're going to repeat exactly the plaster instructions you did for the first half. It'll take you about 3 hours for a good few layers. Let that rest. Remove all the clay that is edging every single side of the mold wall, as well as much as you can get in from the pry keys, and then take your screwdriver and your rubber mallet and put this in the pry key. Hit it very, very carefully. You want to go slowly all the way around. If you feel 1/2 of the mold separating, but the other side is not moving yet, stop. Go on to the next pry key, do it again. If you go quickly, you're going to have half of it off and half of it still suctioned on. Pop it off. Usually you'll have one side come out completely clean. Sometimes there'll be some clay stuck to it, sometimes not. So I'm going to set that off to the side, and now you're going to very, very carefully try to remove the sculpt from the other side. This takes forever. Eventually it'll come out and it'll come clean. If you are using monster clay or Chavant, carefully hit it with a heat gun on the outside of the mold. This will soften the clay, so it will remove a little easily. This trick does not work with water-based clay. If you're still having problems getting some of the Chavant or monster clay out, one of the techniques that I've used is sometimes I brush in a little bit of nap to completely clear out the mold. You can see in the second part of my mold, I ended up with a bit of an air pocket. There are two ways to go about fixing an air pocket. The first way, quick and easy, and especially if you don't have it, if it's on an area that is minimally textured, what you can do is just take a bit of the monster clay, put it in the hole, and try to style it and texture it in the way that it'll fit. The second way is you'll do the same thing except with plaster. This will be a little bit longer living, and you'll be all set. Now let's say if you have a big section of plaster that chipped off and you want to attach it back to the mold. Guess what? Super glue works. Glue that sucker back on. Next up, it's time for latexing. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take a paintbrush, you're going to open up your latex, take your paintbrush, and your first coat, just like plaster, you're doing a print coat in latex. So for this, I usually have both of the sides open so I can see every piece and go in very, very carefully for every crevice. Let that dry for about 30 minutes, close the two. You'll see your mold keys come in super handy here because it clicks together. You can clamp that at this point. I usually do. Sometimes I'll also tape it closed. Now you want to go in and add other coats of latex, especially around the seam line, and get that as thick as you want. Your edges you'll want to have a little bit thinner, so make sure you only get 1 or 2 extra layers around the places where they're going to want to glue down to your face. Let the latex dry overnight, maybe even give it a day or two. If you pull it out too soon, you will tear it. When you're ready to take it out from the mold, you can use cornstarch or baby powder. Both will do the same thing to get the latex to not stick to itself within the inside of the mold. Finally, very carefully remove your latex from your mold, and your first instinct when you put it on your head, go ahead. So that's it. If you have any questions, or just ask in the comments down below, or visit us on our Facebook page at Propped Up Creations. Thanks for watching! You're seeing me use monster clay in a Ultra Cal 30 mold, and the final latex I'm using is a Mask Maker's RD407. The reason why I like monster clay and Chavant NSP is because both of them are sulfur free. So if I decide to cast an object in silicone rather than in plaster, there'll be no inhibition.